Hello again, baseball fans, and welcome to the Super Regionals edition of MLB Draft Weekend Review. I am your host, Kris Dunn, joined as always by my good buddy, Joe Doyle. Joe, what's going on, bud?
Not a lot, man. Back from Corvallis, nursing this hangover. Couldn't make it to game 3, but it's a good week, man. How
So
about you?
speaking of Corvallis, there's only one spot left, and we'll get into the bracket. We'll get into the College World Series and what Omaha looks like. There is one team still to be decided that is in the Corvallis region. That game currently going on right now between Auburn and Oregon State. So, Joe, why don't you give the viewers a little score update there from Corvallis?
Last I looked, it was 2-1 in the top of the 5th. I think we're probably somewhere in the bottom of the 5th, but 2-1 was last I saw. Stanford already punched their ticket today, so we'll see if the Pac-12 can double up here by the end of the night.
For sure, it's really interesting, and we'll talk about what the bracket's going to look like in a minute here. But really dominated by two conferences, and it's going to be interesting if you're not a fan of either of those conferences. We talk about this a lot with college football, right? Where there seems like there's always an SEC school in the national championship. And whenever there's not an SEC school in the national championship, what that means for the ratings and the viewership and how it drops off significantly, it'll be kind of curious to see what those ratings are, because I feel like, and I'm sure you agree, there's not been a more exciting college baseball season that I can remember in recent history. And it would be a shame if somehow the ratings don't show that, simply because we've got a College World Series that's dominated by two conferences. And we'll get into those conferences as we take a look here. The first four teams in to the College World Series headed to Omaha. We have the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, the Texas Longhorns, the Texas A&M Aggies, and the Oklahoma Sooners. So, Joe, when you look at this side of the bracket here, obviously three schools from the Big 12 in Texas, Texas A&M, and Oklahoma. Anything that sticks out to you here? And you're not allowed to say Notre Dame getting past Tennessee. Other than that, something that stands out to you here in this group of four.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, 3 of these teams I did not expect to be here. Notre Dame, I obviously I didn't expect to be here. I thought ECU was going to be able to handle Texas. And then Oklahoma surprised me a little bit. I didn't have them advancing past the Super Regionals, but the Aggies look really good. We were talking we podcasted last week with Cole Wilcox, and he said A&M is the gritty bunch with, a bunch of 23-year-olds that can bang and some sneaky good arms. That would be his team to watch. So, I really like this side of the bracket. I think Notre Dame is more of a complete team than people probably gave them a lot of credit for. And there's some really exciting draft prospects still in this tournament too, and that's always good.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you bring up Texas A&M, right? Because I believe the number was, if I'm remembering correct, 12 or 13 transfers that they brought in from the portal this season. So to your point about a bunch of 22, 23-year-olds grinding it out, there is something to be said about age and experience, certainly when we're talking about playing in Omaha. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that, and how do you feel? Because now we're starting to see a lot of names enter the portal from schools that have been eliminated, and certainly with Texas A&M here, what we're learning is that if you're one of those schools that can bring in a lot of I guess veteran college players, if you can use that phrase. What are your thoughts on the transfer portal, and do you like it? Do you like that we're talking about a Texas A&M team that's basically, going to the College World Series with a bunch of guys that should probably be playing minor league baseball right now?
Yeah, it doesn't bother me at all. In fact, I think having older players in college is really important, more important than in the pros, because when you talk about college ball and you talk about guys that have been doing this for 4 or 5 years, especially with the hitters, you're talking about guys that are willing to come off the fastball. You're talking about guys that are willing to sit spin. They're willing to sit changeup. They know their weaknesses. They know how teams like to get them out. Whereas when you're talking about the 19 and 20-year-olds, sometimes those guys are just, get into a hitter's count and hit a fastball. So when you have those older players, They know how important it is to get ahead. They know how important it is to cover pitches that might be their weakness on their scouting report. And that's just something that the younger players haven't learned quite yet. So it's not to say that the younger players don't have, the ability to impact the game more than the older players, but
Right.
sometimes those younger players, there's more strikeouts with those players. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think one thing that we learn when we get to Omaha a lot of times is you see the players that stand out and perform really well are not the top prospects, are not
Yeah.
the guys that you see in the, if you go to prospectslive.com right now and you look at the top 500 draft prospects, yes, there are several of those guys. A lot of those guys are still playing, but a week from now, it's going to be seniors. It's going to be grad transfers. Those are the guys that we're going to be talking about with the clutch, 2-run double in the bottom of the 7th inning to give their team the lead. Those are the guys that stand out a lot. It's not, like you said, the 19, 20-year-old guys. It's the older guys. And look, you can still have a serviceable career in professional baseball, even if you were playing college at 22 or 23 years old.
Oh, totally. I mean, you look at some of the guys that highlighted the super regionals. Look at Notre Dame with John Michael Bertrand. I mean, that's a guy that's been on draft boards for 3 years. People know who John Michael Bertrand is. He's going to turn 25 this year for Notre Dame. So, he made a huge statement shutting down Tennessee. Trevon Michael. I'm trying to remember his first name. It's something like Trevon Michael. He turns 25 this year, closer for Oklahoma. He's been around. He's on his 3rd school. He's done the JUCO thing. But he's 24 years old. He's pumping 98. He's got feel for 4 pitches. He has feel for getting ahead of hitters. You don't necessarily always see that with the younger guys. And so these older guys, while they're not going to be on top 500 boards, because frankly, Kris, between you and I, if you're drafting, you don't necessarily target guys that should be in AAA or in the pros already.
Right.
There's no projection left. But those are generally the guys that get you to Omaha.
Right. And if you take a quick look back at the bracket here, you talked about some of the guys from Oklahoma, a couple big names from that Oklahoma Sooners roster that are continuing to play and will play this weekend in Omaha. Jake Bennett and Peyton Graham, 2 names that, we do have high on our board of top prospects heading into the draft. Talk a little bit about those guys as we're going to get to see them spotlighted on the big stage.
Yeah, Bennett pitches like a 23-year-old. He throws a lot of strikes. He doesn't have overwhelming stuff. His best pitch is probably a mid 80s slider that is deceptive and sweeps away from lefty bats. I think he's got a pretty good shot to go in the 2nd round just because he probably moves pretty quick and he's got a lot of starter characteristics. But again, not a flashy guy, a guy that's going to be 92 to 93, touching 94, maybe brushing a 95 with 3 or 4 pitches from the left side. And then Peyton Graham is one of the more enigmatic players in this class. There's a lot of swing and miss there, but it's a really enticing body. I mean, he's 6'4", like 190 pounds, really rail thin, but a lot of bat speed, a lot of speed on the bases, a lot of raw power. So he'll be playing shortstop for Oklahoma. There's a couple. I mean, Tanner Treadaway is another one of those 23-year-old outfielder with Oklahoma, finally getting consistent playing time, and he's hitting the hell out of the ball. So Oklahoma's got a lot of good players that have pro careers ahead of them, and a great mix of young, impactful talent with older players that can get the job done.
Anyone else you see from those squads from Notre Dame, Texas A&M, Texas, obviously, that might be a little bit lower on the top 500, or maybe not even there at all, that you're really excited about seeing play in Omaha?
Yeah. One guy that I think the whole draft team has really liked this year, Douglas Hodo, the center fielder for Texas. He's a good center fielder. He's an above average center fielder. He can really run. The bat is probably a below average bat, but he's the type of guy that I think can kind of float around the big leagues, playing a number of positions, maybe a Ben Gamel type with a little bit less bat to ball. I really like the way he plays. I think he's a big leader for that team. And then obviously anytime you get the chance to watch Ivan Melendez on a big stage, you're going to take it. So I'd love to see, I don't have a rooting interest in Omaha, but I'd love to see a Melendez 500-foot homer.
I mean, who wouldn't?
You can't. Yeah, it's just must see TV.
I feel like they should, before the College World Series kicks off, they should just get maybe one participant from each team and just go out there for one round and do a home run derby. We don't really care about
That'd be
anybody
sick.
else. We just want to see Melendez. And if that's the excuse that you need for us to see him just hit bombs in Omaha, then I'm all for it.
That'd be sick. Yeah.
All right. Let's take a look at the other side of the bracket. Again, one matchup still to be determined, and that is Auburn and Oregon State. However, the Stanford Cardinal have booked their ticket, as have the Arkansas Razorbacks and the Ole Miss Rebels. Takeaway here, Joe?
Takeaway here is it doesn't matter how down of a year Stanford and Arkansas had coming into this tournament. They still find a way to get to Omaha. It's incredible. I mean, Stanford has flaws and they underperform their talent all season. And May 15th gets here and, May 1st maybe, and Brock Jones turns into the best outfielder in baseball again. And Drew Bowser starts, really impacting the baseball, and Brain Montgomery is rounding into form. And Stanford just has a way about blowing up June that I don't think a lot of other teams do, but another team that does it is Arkansas. Arkansas fell, sometimes they get to the finish line and they fall just short, but they always get here to this final 8. And it's because they are well-rounded across the board, and they've got a good mix of older pitchers and younger pitchers with stuff, and clubhouse leadership and left-right combos and bench bats that I think just make them a really pesky out in this tournament. I think Stanford's going to be able to handle them. But yeah, I mean, those two teams, like, neither one of them necessarily had a very good season, but here they are in the final 8. I had Southern Miss taking down Ole Miss. I couldn't believe how good Dylan DeLucia was for Ole Miss. I couldn't believe how good Ole Miss's pitching was. Southern Miss just could not get anything going. And then we'll see what happens with Auburn and Oregon State. Selfishly, I am kind of hoping that we see Oregon State to get in there just to take a little bit of the SEC out of play, I guess. And I'd love to get the opportunity to watch Cooper Jerpy and on an even bigger stage.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at regardless of how it shapes up, it's either going to be 3 SEC teams, 3 Big 12 teams, or 2 SEC, 2 Pac-12, and 3 Big 12. Interesting. There's no representative from the ACC, which is often looked at as one of the best conferences in college baseball. Not a single representative there. Mm-hmm. And if you told me that there were going to be 3 SEC representatives, Mississippi State not being one of them, Florida not being one of them,
Vanderbilt
not being one of them.
It's a weird year. I mean, I think we talked about this for a lot of the year, right? The teams that are in this tournament still have pieces and assets on every side of the ball: the bullpen, the lineup, and the starting rotation. They have at least balance. But you look at some of the other, you look at Florida State, you look at Florida, you look at Vanderbilt, you look at, some of these, the North Carolina, you look at some of these teams that we're just so accustomed to seeing. And while they're extremely talented in one area, a lot of them just kind of fell short in terms of throwing out a balanced product. That's one thing about Arkansas and Stanford that I love. They are not teams that are really, really good in any one area, but they can give you a little bit of something in every facet of the game.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too when we look back and we talk about a few of the teams that are in here and how they underperformed throughout the season. You talk about the struggles of Brock Jones and the struggles of Robert Moore, but even the entire team of Ole Miss, right? Like, there's 3 compelling stories here that Brock Jones was a projected early first round pick when the season started. Ole Miss was the number 1 team in the country before the season started. Robert Moore was looked at as a possible top 10 pick before the season started. None of those things were even close to coming true at the midway point. And yet now here we are, Ole Miss in the College World Series. Brock Jones, he's just, like you said, become one of the best outfielders, if not the best outfielder lately. And Robert Moore now has a chance to, even given the struggles throughout the season, he has a chance to step up on the big stage and can almost erase all of those struggles and what everyone has been saying if he can really show out on this particular stage, which is the biggest stage for a college baseball player.
It's exactly what he did last year. I mean, he
Right.
was the best player in the tournament last year. He's been the best player in the tournament. I mean, he had 3 homers the other day. He's been the best player in the tournament this year. Um, Brock Jones is going to be a very difficult nut to crack in the MLB draft because I think there are those that will say, look at his trajectory. He belongs somewhere in the first round. And I think there are those that will look at the entire pie and say, this guy probably shouldn't go before the 3rd round, maybe later. So I'm just excited to continue watching him play because he's very enjoyable to watch play the game.
All right, so let's play a little game here called Up, Down, or Stay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw out some guys and how they've performed in the postseason, right?
Sure.
So guys and how they've performed, and really just honestly, I want you to say up if their projection is going up, their value is going up. You could see them rising on the draft board. Down if you think it's going down a little, or if it's pretty much is what it is right now and not much has changed at all in your opinion. And so since we talked about it a little bit, I guess the first one that we will throw out here just to get it out of the way is we have Brock Jones. So let's talk a little bit about Brock Jones more here, and up, down, or stay here for the Stanford outfielder.
Oh, it's got to be up. He's showing the power. He's showing more bat to ball. The strikeouts are down, and he's leading his team to. And I'll even include May, the month of May. He's been so good. He's been so good for the last 6 weeks that it's hard not to say that he's moving up. We had him around 65 or 70, and with the top 500 coming out tomorrow, he is better represented than that. I think at the end of the day, I don't think I would take him on day one. The swing and miss scares me too much, but there's going to be a team that bites in the second round. And I think Brock Jones has made himself a lot of money over the last 6 weeks.
Yeah, he does. Right now, he's not swinging and missing it very much. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, strikeouts are down. He's still kind of in that getting 1 strikeout every game type of thing. But there haven't been any of the 5 strikeouts, 4 strikeouts, like just cataclysmic performances. So I want to see more of that.
All right, now let's move over to the rest of these guys are guys that are no longer playing. And so I want to get your thoughts on these guys because we're not going to get a chance to see them in Omaha, but they are top prospects. And just kind of overall, what are your thoughts on Zach Neto, the shortstop from Campbell? Up, down, or stay based on how he performed in the postseason?
Up. Definitive up. He looked really good for the short amount of time that he got to play. He also made highlight reel plays on defense. Zach Neto, and I think for a number of reasons, the season line never dipped. I mean, he got better all year. He was the best player on his team in the regionals, and I think Zach Neto has a pretty good case to go in the top 15 picks right now.
I will throw myself under the bus here. Thomas Maxwell brings it up. I did say this earlier. No teams from the ACC. I forgot. Notre Dame is actually in the ACC now.
Notre Dame is so tough, man.
I'm just used to them
bounced
being
all over the
independent.
place. Yeah, they're independent in my book too.
Yeah. So appreciate that, Thomas Maxwell, for calling me out on that one there. Zach Neto's teammate, Thomas Harrington. Up, down, or stay?
I don't think Thomas Harrington necessarily hurt his stock too much. It was definitely a down performance for him. The command wasn't there. He didn't miss a lot of bats with the fastball, which is a little unconventional. I did think it was Harrington's opportunity to show out against better competition, and he didn't. A power 5, and he didn't really show out like I was expecting, but I still think Harrington is talented enough and projectable enough to go on day one in the top, 36 to 40 picks. And so I don't think one start can kill a guy, but it certainly wasn't a great outing.
Yeah. Obviously the stat line doesn't look good. It is just one game. Look, we're sitting here and we're trying to determine whether a guy's value has gone up or down based on, in Harrington's case, one start. So
yeah, and you can't do it off one start. I mean,
right.
with the hitters, I think you can make a better case. Like, you look at a guy like Brock Jones, who's facing talent from different conferences, and he's got 8 games and 35 plate appearances. Like, that's one thing, and to a lesser degree, Neto against 3 Power 5 schools, or just schools out of his conference. That's another thing. But one start, you can't kill a kid for it.
Right. Another right-handed arm we'll take a look at from a squad that is no longer playing, and that's the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Gabriel Hughes, 6 innings, 9 hits, 6 earned in his one start during the regional. Up, down, or stay here, Joe, on the draft stock of Gabriel Hughes?
Yeah, so again, this is a stay for me. He had one big blow up inning, and the swing and miss stuff was there. The slider looked great. The fastball was getting by hitters. They just figured him out, and I think that was always going to be the case with Gabriel Hughes. If you work him late into games against top tier competition, I don't know if he goes in the first round. I still think he's a great value in the 20 to 35 range. I think he's one of the top 5 college pitchers available in this class. But the stuff is there. It's just he's got to miss more. He's got to miss more bats with the fastball. And I think getting into pro ball and establishing a consistent shape to his fastball, which is something that he's struggled with all season, will be a big play for him in pro ball.
All right, so then I ask you this question because we just talked about Thomas Harrington, and here we've got Gabriel Hughes, and they're both guys that are, in terms of where they get selected in the draft, possibly interchangeable. Who do you take first, Harrington or Hughes?
I would actually take Harrington before Hughes. I think Hughes has more explosive stuff right now. But I do think Thomas Harrington has kind of another gear, another reserve tank, if you will, that he hasn't tapped into. Listen, I think Harrington is going to be a guy that throws 98 with more consistency. I think he's going to be 94 to 96 in due time. But both guys suffer from not having a consistent fastball that misses bats, and that's going to be a project. But I mean, when you're talking about a guy that moves well and controls his body well and has more juice in front of him, I think that's Harrington.
All right. Before we get into a few more guys, a couple big name hitters that we'll see taken early on in the draft. Guys, if you have any questions on anything, if you've had a chance to check out the mock draft 3.0 over at prospectslive.com, you have questions on that, throw that in the comment section. We'll get to those. If you have questions on the super regional or the road to Omaha in general, perhaps your team is still playing, you want to talk a little bit about that, get those questions in and we'll get those read on air. One team and one particular player that is no longer playing that we thought might be is Jacob Berry and the LSU Tigers. So, Joe, throughout the course of the season, we have talked about Berry being a top 10 pick. We've also talked about Berry not even being a first round pick after going 4 for 14 through 3 games in the regional and then getting bounced. Up, down, or stay on Jacob Berry?
Yeah, again, I think Berry had the chance to improve his stock dramatically in this tournament. When you're a star name and you do star things in a star tournament, I think you really have the chance to kind of vault yourself up a peg. I don't think he did anything to hurt his stock. I mean, 4 for 14 is a fine performance in 3 games. He didn't have a ton of impact at the plate, but that's not to say he didn't look good at the plate. My question with Berry remains, and will remain through the draft, is whoever drafts him, what is their plan defensively? Where do they plan on putting him? I think someone ultimately ends up taking him in the top 15. I think he probably fits for me somewhere, 5 picks later than that, 15 to 20. But Berry didn't do anything to hurt his stock.
All right. And then another guy who I'm really disappointed, not disappointed in him or his team, just disappointed in the sense that we're not going to get a chance to see him play, because I was really excited to see Virginia Tech and I was really excited to see Gavin Cross get to Omaha. I wanted to see this team, everything that they've been through and the run that they made late in the season to get to one of those top seeds in the tournament, just falling a little bit short. But yeah. Up, down, or stay here on Gavin Cross. We've had him pretty much locked around the 7 to 12 range the entire season. So
Yeah.
keeping that in mind, right? Not a lot of room to go up, but keeping in mind he's been at the 7 to 12 all year, up, down, or stay on Gavin Cross.
Yeah, so for Cross, for me, I'll change it up a little bit, and I'll say that he improved his stock. One thing that I
Really?
think, well, one thing I think people got the opportunity to see is this is for people that haven't watched him, live in person or on a regular basis. Gavin Cross can play center field. It's not a great center field, but in a pinch, Gavin Cross can handle center field. And I thought that kind of stood out. He made a lot of plays running back towards the wall, which I was impressed with, and the power showed out. So, like you said, I don't think Gavin Cross has much upward room to move. But I do think what he probably did was he probably stapled his name in to that top, 12 range, top, at the very latest 15. So I think Gavin Cross has looked good all season, and I think this really just kind of cemented him as a top 15, but for my money, a top 12 guy.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point too, in the sense that this more than anything could have improved his stock solely based on exposure, right?
Exactly. I mean, think of it this way: like if you go into these regionals and the super regionals, and there are 5 teams or 6 teams that have a top 15 grade on you, and that ups to 10 or 11 teams that have a top 15 grade on you, then all of the sudden you got teams kind of battling it out for like, okay, who's willing to go first? Who's willing to take Gavin Cross first? The old adage in draft circles is it only takes one team. It takes one team to get you drafted. Well, if there's 11 teams instead of 4 teams that view you in a certain light, it only improves your draft stock. So I think Gavin Cross really just kind of confirmed what a lot of people had surmised going into this season.
All right. So again, we've had him pretty much as a staple
Hmm.
between that 7 to 12 range the entire season. Maybe that's gone up a little bit, but by and large, he's probably still right around that area. Question is he the first outfielder? Is he the first college outfielder selected in the draft?
It's a good question. Right now, I say yes. I think he is the first college outfielder selected, and I actually think he's the second college hitter off the board, maybe third actually.
We're
I
going
think
Brooksley and Parada? Or are those the
so.
two? Or you
Yeah,
not? Oh, we got spoiler alert.
so I think Brooksley and Parada are probably the first and second college bats off the board, and then I think it's kind of a battle royale after that between Gavin Cross and Jace Young. And if you're asking me today, man, it's a bit of a coin flip, but I do like Cross's athleticism and his ability to potentially, in a pinch, play up the field. So, yeah, I think he's the first outfielder off the board, though.
I mean, we might have a Tennessee outfielder fighting for a spot in that battle royale, right?
Possible. Yeah, I like Jordan Beck, but he leaves a little bit to be desired in terms of what Gavin Cross already offers.
Sure. All right, the last one we're going to get to here is a right-handed pitcher from Oklahoma State, and that
Hmm.
is Justin Campbell. This is a name that we have maybe skimmed over throughout the entire course of the season. Haven't talked a lot about him on the show, but certainly a name that could find his way into the day one conversation.
Yeah.
Maybe not quite there yet, but 7 innings, 10 hits, 7 earned.
So this is
Um,
going to surprise you. Justin Campbell's actually moving up substantially in the top 500. And the reason I say that, his 2 appearances here, and we'll call it 1 appearance for what it is. They didn't do anything for me. And the reason I say that is because if you are a Justin Campbell believer like I am, I think the value in Justin Campbell is not what he is today. And it's the same type of philosophy as when the Dodgers drafted Bobby Miller, when the Mariners drafted Logan Gilbert or George Kirby, when the Blue Jays drafted Alek Manoah. Like, what Justin Campbell is just clay. He's a long body with long levers. He's got a fastball that metrically really plays at the top of the zone. He's been up to 97, and I think he's going to get to the point in his pro career where he's sitting 94 to 96, like Harrington. But the fastball already misses bats. He's got a downer curveball that he needs to learn to command at the bottom of the zone. It's going to be an out pitch. It's going to be a plus curveball once he starts missing bats with it. And I think he's got better feel for a changeup than a lot of people give him credit for. So Campbell was, I believe, and I could be wrong. I could go look at it right now, but I choose not to. I believe he was 35 to 45 in our last update, and he's going to take a pretty good jump from where he was. So this start certainly didn't raise his stock, but I think just inherently, as the season has come to an end and we've looked at his season under the microscope of everything that it is, data included, Justin Campbell is one of the better college pitching prospects in this class for me.
All right, so then let's go back to a question that I posed to you a little bit earlier, because it seems like all of these guys are right in that late first round discussion, or certainly early second, mid second, somewhere in the second round. So between these three, and we'll pull them up again: Thomas Harrington at Campbell, Gabriel Hughes at Gonzaga, and Justin Campbell at Oklahoma State. You had said earlier Thomas Harrington ahead of Gabriel Hughes. So if I asked you to rank those three in order, what do you got?
Well, I don't want to give anything away, and I'm actually not giving anything away here because this won't be the order that you'll see on our board tomorrow. But I would probably take just if I was a GM,
Right.
I would probably take Campbell first. I would probably take honestly, it's a toss-up between Harrington and Hughes because I think they both offer the same thing. They're both very athletic and they both struggle to repeat the fastball. So yeah, I think for me, if we're looking at who's going to be the best starting pitcher in Major League Baseball in 2027, I think it's going to be Justin Campbell.
And so you're taking Campbell. A lot of the reasons you're taking Campbell is based on projectability.
But if you're buying raw stuff, you take Gabriel Hughes. He's got the spin rates, he's got the fastball velo. But if you're looking for a guy that you can turn into something more than what he is, I take Campbell. And I think there are a handful of teams in Major League Baseball that could turn Campbell into a very good number 3 starter.
All right, so we've got about 10 minutes left here, guys, before we get out of here. So get those questions in now. If you have a question for Joe or myself and you want us to address it on air, get those questions in the comment section right now. Again, we've got about 10 minutes left in the show here. We will take a minute and go back over the mock draft 3.0. Again, guys, you can go to prospectslive.com and check out our most recent mock draft and get an idea of where your team might be leaning one way or another. But let's go out to the questions right now. We've got Josh Pimentel has a question here, Joe. Is there anyone that moved into the top 50 with tomorrow's update that you would say is more of a surprise, or someone that most people haven't even heard of?
Okay, so it's tricky because I mean we've kind of answered this before in the past. Like we've kind of had these like 800 or 900 names in front of us for a while, so they're not a surprise to us. But I think in terms of fame, one guy that you may not have heard of that I think is going to do really well in the draft is Tanner Schobel, the shortstop out of Virginia Tech. He did very well for himself in the tournament. He showcased quick hands, showcased great defense at shortstop. I don't know if he's going to stick at shortstop, but he's going to be a plus defender at second base, so it doesn't really matter. I think Schobel could go on day one. He's represented close to that in the top 50. So yeah, I would say Tanner Schobel is probably the guy that maybe you haven't heard of that could be a pretty early-ish pick.
Yeah, it's funny you bring up Schobel, because when I was putting together the list of guys that were no longer playing for up, down, or stay and what their value may look like, I thought about putting him in there because, like you said, he's a name that we certainly haven't talked a lot about. Not a lot of people really know about him, but certainly a name to keep in mind.
And the thing about college shortstops in just about every draft is when one goes, they all go.
Right.
So whether it's Kasevich or Peyton Graham or Schobel, when the first one goes, you usually see a run of 3 or 4 of them in the next 10 picks. And I genuinely think Schobel is off the board by the 50th pick. I would be surprised if he's still there.
All right, so I want to take a look back at the mock draft 3.0 that we went over a little bit last week. I'm gonna pull this down from Pimentel. Appreciate the question, but let's take a look back. I believe, where are they in here? No, that's not it. That's 11 to 15. Looking at the 16 to 20 range here, we find that name Thomas Harrington right there with the Cleveland Guardians. But we've got a question here from Fino MYT.
Mm.
Most likely position group that the Guardians draft.
So all I've heard about the Guardians, I've heard them connected to one high school arm, and that's Owen Miller. I've heard them connected to Owen Miller quite a bit. I still think that he makes more sense in the second round, but I tend to think this is going to be a college pitcher. Harrington or Campbell or Hughes or Jerpy. Like that's generally just the route that the Guardians have gone. I think one guy to watch for would be Jet Williams. He's a shortstop, a prep shortstop out of Rockwell Mead. Um, they've generally had a thing for tools and up the middle talent, and Jet Williams certainly fits that mold. They haven't really gone for it this early in the draft. I know they've done it at the end of the first round, but that would be the one prep that I would watch for there.
All right, Fino, appreciate the question. Tampa Bay Rays fan is back for another week. Appreciate you tuning in once again. Question here: any good outfielders that will be around the 25th overall pick in the second round? Who could you expect might be there
Oh,
if you're a Rays fan? We're talking somewhere around what, like the 60 overall pick range?
yeah, 60th overall pick. So Tampa Bay Rays. So I will say this, like if you're looking at the Rays, you're probably looking at an athlete, someone that is currently in center field and might have to move into a corner. Um, I think of the two guys that come to mind right away are Ryan Cermak out of Illinois State and Colby Thomas out of Mercer. I think those two, that's kind of where their range starts. They've got huge exit velocity data, and they currently play back and forth between right field and center field. I think those two college outfielders might make some sense. I think Clark Elliott at Michigan might make some sense. But I also think there's a chance that you see one of Brock Jones or Judd Fabian here. I will say though, just because those are two famous names, I don't strike the Rays as a team to take a chance on guys that don't have hit tools. And that's kind of, their MO, put the ball in play and defend. So I would say Clark Elliott would be a name from Michigan that would make a lot of sense and would be a lot of fun.
Clark Elliott going at the 60 mark. That would be an improvement based on where we thought he might go a couple months ago.
Yeah, I think we've had him kind of floating around that, just like buoying somewhere in that second round area. That's about where he's going to be in the new top 500. So yeah, I expect him to go somewhere in the second round at the latest, early in the third round. But if you get him with the 25th pick, 60th pick, or whatever you want to call it, that's a pretty good player.
As is the case with every single draft, there's always some guys that we have to worry about. There's always some high school guys that get drafted a little bit lower than they had anticipated.
Hmm.
Not going to the situation that they thought. Have you heard anything? Do we know? Are there any guys that, as of right now, may have either come out and said, "Don't draft me, I'm going to college," or have maybe priced themselves out? Or is there a guy that could just decide that he doesn't want to sign and go to college?
Yeah, so there are a few high school pitchers that have come out and priced themselves out of this draft. I'll say Dylan Lesko is not one of them, just because I think that needs to come out. Um, I hesitate to answer it because let me say this: these guys are still being evaluated. They're still doing Zoom meetings. A lot of them are doing the draft combine. They still have a chance to really impress. And if I were to come out and say that, oh, their number's too high, they're definitely going to go to school, not only would it undercut them and their agents and teams' due diligence, it's a wrinkle that is not mine to throw into the draft. So I'll say this. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the top 100, there are three, maybe two or three high school arms that have decided that they're going to go to college or they've priced themselves out, but it's not my place to comment on it.
Yeah, I think a lot can change too. I mean, you don't
Sure.
necessarily know until it
And
happens.
honestly, like these kids and their representation and their families, they put a number on themselves. And if a team comes to them with a number a little bit shy of that, it's their job, it's their opportunity to make that decision. It's not my job doing this in this space to say anyone has removed their name from anything. So if they comment on it directly, if they come out and remove themselves publicly, you'll be the first to see it if you follow Prospects Live or you follow it on Twitter.
All right, and we've got one more question that we'll get to. Apologize if we didn't get a chance to get to your question tonight, but as always, we'll be back next week. And if you really have some other questions, you can reach out to Joe or myself on Twitter, and we can get to those as well too. But
Definitely. Yeah.
last one that we'll get to here tonight comes from Gamers 2.0. Which college pitchers would you confidently say fall to day two? So I'm going to take this a step further and basically assume that he's saying which first round,
Yeah.
which projected first round college pitchers. So we're probably only looking at, maybe 4 or 5 guys here. Some of the guys that we talked about earlier, right? The Hughes, the Harrington, the Campbell, any other college first round projection guys that you could see falling to day two.
Again, like I don't mean to be the like bearer of bad news and like the white knight here or anything, but it's just not my place to comment on that. I know that sounds like, oh, trying to take the high road or anything, but I just don't want to say that any kid is not going to get drafted just because I haven't heard that he will. Like there is a universe where I could see Landon Sims getting drafted in the first round. I kind of look at the fringier guys. I look at the Connor Prelips. I look at the Jonathan Cannons, the Adam Mazers, the Carson Wisenhunts. Those guys that we currently have right now between 25 and 50. I think there's a chance any of those guys are available at the beginning of day two. But we know one thing about college pitchers, and that is if teams don't love anybody and they're not willing to pay a high schooler that they do love, there's safety in college pitchers. Like Jonathan Cannon, while he doesn't have, in my opinion, first round pure stuff, he walked like 9 batters this season. And you look at a team like Seattle, honestly, for example, that has such a motto of throwing strikes. Jonathan Cannon could go in the first round because it's their model. So yeah, I would say look at our top 500, look at the 25 to 60 range, and those are the names that I would focus on. Fall in love with one of them and hope that one of them is available for your team in this at the beginning of day two.
Yeah, and I think if I'm going to answer this
And
question,
actually, I do want to say, and I could be wrong on this. I may be getting my years mixed up. I want to say day one this year is actually the first and second round. So I think we throw around, and this has been an issue for years with the draft.
oh, maybe.
The day one thing. I think day one is 74 picks this year. So if your question is round two, kind of you have a blueprint. If you're talking about round three, just go look at like the 50 to 100 mark.
Right. Yeah, and I think like if I'm going to answer this question, which college pitchers could you see falling to day two? All of them.
Yeah,
You could make
all
a
of them.
case. You could
Yeah.
make a case that for any college pitcher, name your college pitcher, and you could make a case. We could sit here and make a case for him not going. I mean, we can go back and we can look at the mock draft, our mock draft 3.0, right? It's right here in front of us.
I could poke holes in. I mean, go to Blade Tidwell. Is he the first one on here?
No, we've got so there's 1 through 5. I mean, the
Yep.
first
Keep going.
college
Still
pitcher we
nothing.
have.
Gabriel Hughes. Okay,
There you go,
so
13.
got
You just
blown up
said.
in got blown up in the playoffs. Inconsistent fastball shape. Has 2 breaking balls that melt together. Fastball spin that is fringe average. Like if you want to poke holes in these guys, you can poke holes in all of them. It's just a matter of who do teams like, and that's why I like Justin Campbell so much. It's because like when all else fails, Justin Campbell has long levers, the ability to repeat, and a fastball that misses bats. And that is not something that you really find in this guy. Cooper Jerpy, best college pitcher in the country this year. Breaking ball that doesn't have two-plane break. He's got a fastball that only gets up to 93, maybe touching 94 on his very best day. But model teams probably vault him up higher with the low release and the hop. So, yeah, I mean, listen, if you were talking about like any normal draft year, and this is not a non-normal draft year, but if you were to tell me that a college lefty that throws 91 to 92 is going to go in the first round, I would say you're insane unless they had a plus pitch. And he's got a couple of weapons, but he's still a lefty that's only been up to 91 or 92, and he doesn't have the frame or the delivery or the athleticism to suggest Cooper Jerpy is going to throw 97 someday. So there are holes that you can pick in every single player, but as the draft goes, and this is why mocking is so hard, it just takes one team. One team has to fall in love with what it could be and what it currently is. And so, yeah, anybody could fall. Kumar Rocker could be there in the 5th round. We don't know.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. We talked about that a little bit last week. We're not going to get into him. We don't have any time left. We are going to get out of here. So appreciate all the questions in the chat tonight, guys. If you have questions, be sure to reach us out on Twitter at KRS Dunn or at Joe Doyle MILB. We'll get to those there. Check out the Mock Draft 3.0 prospectslive.com. If you haven't already, subscribe to the Patreon for as little as $5. You can get a lot of additional great content. Next week, we'll be back, and we've got the College World Series to talk about. So for my good buddy, Joe Doyle, I am your host, Kris Dunn. We will be back next week, next Monday, 9 p.m. Eastern time. Until then, enjoy the weekend, enjoy the College World Series, and take care, everybody.